Captain Sarah Martinez wiped a line of grease from her fingers onto the rag tucked in her waistband, squinting as the rising sun cut across the airfield. The desert light stretched shadows long and thin over the concrete, painting her A-10 Thunderbolt II in steel and amber. She moved with ritual precision, boots steady, eyes scanning for any imperfection. The Warthog had been her partner through dozens of combat sorties, and even though command had sidelined her into logistics runs, she still treated the machine as if each bolt and panel carried the weight of lives. It was a small rebellion keeping her discipline sharp even when the missions weren't. Engines of transport helicopters coughed to life across the runway, prepping for another supply run. That was her world now: cargo pallets, manifest checks, fuel tallies, mundane tasks that filled her hours but never her spirit. She'd once trained for the kind of flying that demanded nerve and instinct, threading her bird through terrain that looked like it would swallow her whole. Now, she signed off clipboards and watched others take those risks. It was the kind of demotion that wasn't written down, but everyone could see it. The sound of boots broke her rhythm. She looked up as a group of men in desert fatigues strode across the tarmac, their pace purposeful, their presence undeniable. The patches on their sleeves gave them away before anything else. SEAL Team Alpha. Special operations, the kind of soldiers who carried a storm with them wherever they went. Sarah's eyes tracked them as they cut across the airfield, heading straight for the maintenance chief. Their leader, broad-shouldered and hard-jawed, carried himself like he owned the ground under his feet. He spared her a glance quick, dismissive, before focusing on business. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez needs the supply manifest signed off, he said, voice clipped, professional. We deploy in 6 hours. Sarah bent back over the inspection panel, tools in hand, but her ears stayed tuned. She caught the fragments of conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. High-value target. Mountain extraction. Narrow valleys with cloud cover so heavy it killed visibility. Enemy positions dug into the ridgelines. No rotary support, downdrafts too dangerous. No fast movers, jets couldn't dive low enough without eating rock. The words painted a picture she knew too well: a suicide corridor with no viable air cover. Her jaw flexed as she tightened a bolt, the metal cool under her hand. She had flown worse, threading through night canyons with nothing but terrain-following radar and a gut that refused to quit. The A-10 was built for this: low, slow, and lethal where nothing else dared to fly. She didn't need the briefing slides to know it. Her brain was already mapping approach angles, calculating firing lanes, picturing how the GU-8 could rake those ridgelines clean without touching friendlies. But none of that mattered. Nobody was asking her opinion. The SEAL commander caught her standing nearby, listening more closely than he liked. His eyes narrowed, and then he gave her a smile that didn't reach his face. This is a classified briefing area, he said, lowering his voice so the insult carried sharper. Sweetheart, maybe you should focus on getting our supplies loaded instead of eavesdropping on grown-up conversations. The words hit harder than she let show. Sarah kept her expression neutral, her hands steady on the panel. Of course, she answered simply, turning back to the checklist. She had learned long ago that firing back only fed men like him. Better to let her record 43 combat missions, 0 friendly fire, every target engaged speak when the chance finally came. She folded the rag carefully, sliding it back into her pocket, and kept working, the sound of her tools sharp against the morning quiet. But behind her calm eyes, a fire banked low. The SEALs could sneer, the commanders could shuffle her into logistics, but Sarah knew the truth. When the skies closed in and the valley swallowed men whole, she might be the only one who could fly into the storm and come out alive. Somewhere deep in her gut, she felt it: the opportunity was coming. And when it did, she would be ready. The operations room buzzed with restrained urgency as officers filed in, maps and satellite images already glowing across the wall-mounted screens. Sarah slipped into the back, technically there to confirm supply drop coordinates, nothing more. She kept her hands folded behind her back, posture neutral, eyes trained on the shifting images of jagged mountains and valleys cloaked in heavy cloud cover. Even from the rear row, she could feel the weight in the room. Every man in uniform knew this was a mission with margins so thin they barely existed. Colonel Hayes stood at the front, laser pointer in hand, his voice hard as stone. "The target zone sits here," he said, the red dot circling a valley boxed in by sheer granite walls. Canyon system with overlapping fields of fire along both ridgelines. Enemy forces are entrenched in fighting positions. 30, possibly more. The package is holed up in a cave system at this coordinate. Extraction window is 20 minutes, maximum. The SEALs sat rigid in their chairs, eyes following every movement of the laser across the map. Their commander, Blake, leaned forward. "Close air support if things go sideways." Hayes shook his head grimly. F-16s can't dive low enough without risking catastrophic terrain collision. Even if they could, they're 30 minutes out at best. Apache pilots have ruled it impossible. The downdrafts in that valley make rotary wing insertion suicidal. You'll be going in with minimal air cover. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She could almost hear the ghostly whine of her A-10 engines in her ears, see the way the Warthog would slide through those valleys like a blade between ribs. That aircraft was made for impossible terrain, for flying low when everything else was grounded. Yet no one so much as glanced at her in the back row. She was logistics, another clipboard, another supply manifest. The colonel advanced the slides, showing grainy recon photos of shoulder-fired missiles bristling like teeth along the ridge. Anti-air threats confirmed here, here, and here. Standard protocols won't work. Too much risk of fratricide in these conditions. Sarah leaned forward slightly, studying the satellite images. Her eyes caught something the others skimmed past, a narrow cut from the southeast, a riverbed threading beneath the radar shadow of the ridgeline. The walls would conceal an aircraft until the last possible moment, delivering it directly behind the enemy positions. Dangerous, yes, but not impossible. Not for the Warthog. She hesitated, then raised her voice just enough. "Sir, there's an approach here," she said, gesturing toward the southeast corridor. Heads turned, some annoyed at the interruption, others faintly amused. Following the riverbed keeps you under most of the radar coverage. An A-10 could stay concealed, then pop up behind their positions. Major Williams, the operations officer, frowned but leaned in to examine the screen. "Those canyon walls are tight," he said slowly. "Most pilots wouldn't risk it in deteriorating weather." Sarah met his eyes evenly. "Yes, sir. But the A-10 was designed for this kind of mission profile. Low-level navigation, terrain masking, precision strike." Williams studied her face, then asked, "How many low-level attack sorties have you flown, Captain?" The room stilled slightly. Sarah straightened. 43 combat missions, sir. All successful. 0 friendly fire. Advanced weapons employment certifications. Graduate of Top Gun school." A murmur rippled through the back of the room. Williams blinked, clearly recalibrating his impression of her. But before he could say more, Colonel Hayes cut in, his voice final. "Noted, but Captain Martinez, your assignment is supply coordination. Stay in your lane." The words landed like a door slammed in her face. She inclined her head, forcing herself to silence, though fire burned in her chest. The room moved on without her, back to timelines and risk assessments, the SEALs already mapping their movements through a valley designed to kill them. Sarah sat quietly, eyes on the screen, fingers curling into her palms. She could already hear the radio calls in her head, the desperation, the static of men pinned down with no air cover. She knew exactly how this briefing would play out in the field, and though no one here wanted to hear it, she also knew she was the only one who could change the ending. The operations center was thick with tension, every screen glowing with maps and telemetry feeds that told a story of a mission unraveling by the second. Sarah stood in the back, arms folded, trying to keep her breathing even as the radio crackled with voices barely holding their composure. Commander Blake's tone cut through the static. harsher than it had been at briefing. We're not moving, taking heavy fire, overlapping fields of fire across both ridges. We need close air support now or we're done here. Colonel Hayes leaned over the console, face grim. Status on the F-16s? Still 22 minutes out, sir, an aide answered quickly. And with the cloud ceiling dropping, they may not even be able to get visual on the target zone when they arrive. Another officer shook his head. Apaches can't maneuver in those downdrafts. We've already lost too much time debating rotary options. The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone in the room knew what those words meant. SEAL Team Alpha was trapped in a kill box with no viable support inbound. Sarah could picture it perfectly. Men pinned against the canyon wall, enemy fire cascading down on them, ammunition dwindling with every exchange. She could hear the edge of desperation in Blake's voice, the kind she'd heard before from ground units, praying for air cover that never came soon enough. Her pulse kicked up, but her voice was calm when she stepped forward. Sir, I can take the A-10 through the canyon. I know the southeastern riverbed approach. I can be there in minutes. Every head turned toward her. Colonel Hayes blinked, as if he hadn't even realized she was in the room. Captain Martinez, this isn't a logistics run, he said, skepticism sharpening his tone. This is an active combat zone under extreme conditions. Sarah held his gaze. With respect, sir, this is what I was trained for. 43 combat missions, all successful. 0 friendly fire. The A-10 was designed for this exact terrain. Low, slow, surgical firepower. I can get through the weather, stay under radar, and clear those positions before the SEALs are overrun. Major Williams spoke up, his voice measured. She identified that approach before anyone else, Colonel. And she's right, the Warthog is built for this. If anyone on this base can thread that canyon, it's her. The radio flared again, Blake's voice raw with urgency. We've got 2 wounded, enemy massing for an assault on our flank. We need air support now, not in 20 minutes. The weight of the moment pressed down on the operations center. Hayes looked at the tactical screen, the static icons of the SEAL team holding ground under fire that grew heavier with every passing minute. He looked back at Sarah, studying the calm fire in her eyes. This wasn't bravado. This was certainty. Captain Martinez, he said finally, his voice clipped. You're authorized for immediate launch. Call sign Viper 1. You're cleared hot for close air support in defense of SEAL Team Alpha. Sarah didn't waste a breath. She snapped to attention. Yes, sir. Then she was gone, boots hammering against the corridor floors as she sprinted for the tarmac. The morning air hit her sharp and cold as she ran, adrenaline surging through her bloodstream, sharpening every sense. Her A-10 sat waiting, engines gleaming under the floodlights, loaded heavy with 30mm rounds and Mavericks. She climbed the ladder in 3 strides, sliding into the cockpit like it was an extension of her own body. Fingers flew over switches, muscle memory guiding her through a stripped-down pre-flight check. The turbines roared to life, that familiar, comforting whine that always seemed to settle her heartbeat even as the world spun out of control. Tower control came over comms. Viper 1, cleared for immediate departure, runway 27. She pushed the throttles forward. The Warthog leapt down the runway, the ground trembling beneath its weight before the wheels broke free and the aircraft clawed into the gray sky. Sarah banked southeast, alone, no wingman, her bird hugging the terrain as she dove toward the canyon system. The weather worsened with every mile, clouds thickening, visibility dropping, but her hands were steady on the stick. Terrain following radar pinged against the canyon walls, guiding her lower, deeper. The mountains closed in around her, jagged stone and mist threatening to swallow her whole. She rode the turbulence like she was born to it, threading the riverbed with the precision of someone who had spent her life training for the impossible. Her radio crackled again, Blake's voice breaking through the storm. Viper 1, do you copy? We're running out of time. Sarah adjusted her heading, eyes narrowing, her voice even and calm. Copy, Alpha. Hold your position. Air support is inbound. The Warthog's engines screamed through the canyon, a predator dropping low with no wingman, carrying the full weight of the mission on her shoulders. And for the first time all day, Sarah Martinez wasn't logistics. She was exactly what the battlefield needed. The canyon walls funneled sound like a drum, and when Sarah pushed the throttles forward, the roar of her A-10 filled the valley in a way that seemed to freeze both friend and foe. The radio lit up with frantic chatter. SEAL Team Alpha pinned down and bleeding out. Enemy fire pouring down from the ridges above them. Sarah's targeting display flashed hot with muzzle signatures, red dots marking overlapping fields of fire that would have annihilated the team if she hadn't arrived. Her voice was calm, almost detached. Viper 1 has visual. Beginning attack run on Northern Ridge. She dropped low, leveling out so close to the valley floor that jagged rocks scraped past her wings. Her heads-up display painted the first target. Enemy fighters dug into a fortified nest along the northern slope. With a squeeze of the trigger, the GU-8 cannon thundered, its signature growl ripping across the canyon like an angry god. 30mm shells raked the ridge with surgical precision, tearing through sandbags and steel with merciless efficiency. Enemy fire cut off mid-burst, positions shredded before they even had time to pivot their weapons. The sound echoed long after she'd banked hard, pulling away. Outstanding shooting, Viper 1. Blake's voice crackled through the radio, disbelief tangled with relief. You're putting rounds exactly where we need them. Sarah barely registered the praise. Her eyes were already locked on the next threat, a larger emplacement tucked deep into a rocky outcropping, shielded from small arms but perfectly visible to her sensors. She rolled left, banking hard, the A-10 shuddering under the strain as she lined up the shot. Engaging fortified position, Southern Ridge. Her thumb flicked the missile release. A maverick streaked off her wing, white smoke curling against the gray sky as it sliced toward the outcropping. The explosion hit with a violent crack, rocking the entire valley, sending debris and fireballs skyward. A half-second later, secondary detonations rippled outward. The emplacement had been storing munitions. The shockwave rattled even Sarah's cockpit, the bloom of fire silhouetting enemy fighters scrambling for cover. Direct hit, an officer back at base muttered into the operations center silence. Hayes and Williams leaned forward over the monitors, watching the gun camera feed with wide eyes. The logistics pilot they'd all overlooked was dismantling an entrenched enemy force with the precision of a veteran ace. But Sarah wasn't done. Her sensors flagged a line of suppression fire hammering down on the SEAL's exact position, pinning them against a stone wall with no room to move. She could see the flashes, the coordinated bursts designed to break the team before they could even reach their target. She pulled back on the stick, rolled the aircraft inverted, and dropped into a steep dive. For a heartbeat, she was flying belly up, canyon walls rushing past above her canopy, the ground tilting closer in a way that would have frozen less disciplined hands. At the last possible second, she rolled out, nose locked on the enemy nest. The GU-8 cannon thundered again, the sound reverberating like the valley itself was splitting open. Shells punched into the enemy position with ruthless accuracy, and in seconds the suppressive fire was silenced. Dust, fire, and silence followed in the wake of her guns. Blake's voice came again, this time almost reverent. Viper 1, we're moving thanks to you. Sarah pulled up, circling back over the canyon, eyes scanning as the SEALs broke cover and advanced. She kept her A-10 in a protective orbit, rolling to each side, her presence a shield in the sky. Enemy fighters who had been so confident in their terrain now kept their heads down, unwilling to risk challenging the Warthog that had dismantled their defenses in 3 surgical passes. The SEALs pushed through the valley, reached the target cave, and moments later, Blake's triumphant voice echoed over the radio. Objective secured, package recovered, preparing for exfil. Sarah stayed overhead, circling like a guardian angel, ensuring the extraction helicopters could come in without fear of anti-air fire. When the Blackhawks finally thundered through the valley, they were unchallenged, every threat neutralized, every gun silent. Sarah's presence held the field, her weapons still hot, until the last bird lifted out with the SEALs and their rescued operative aboard. Back at base, silence held the operations center. Hayes, Williams, and the staff had watched the entire engagement unfold through Sarah's gun camera feed. Every pass had been textbook perfect, every decision measured, every shot a reminder of the skills they'd buried under supply manifests and routine cargo runs. Williams exhaled first, almost in disbelief. She just saved them all. When Sarah's A-10 touched down, ground crews lined the taxiway, their faces no longer indifferent but lit with respect. Commander Blake was waiting, helmet tucked under his arm, the same man who had called her sweetheart hours earlier. He stepped forward, extended his hand, and for the first time his voice carried no arrogance, only gratitude. "Captain Martinez, I owe you an apology, and my team owes you our lives. That was the finest close air support I've ever seen." Colonel Hayes approached next, holding a fresh set of orders in his hand. His expression was equal parts regret and admiration. "Effective immediately, you're reassigned to combat operations, Captain, and I'll be recommending a promotion." Sarah removed her helmet, wiping sweat from her brow, her hazel eyes steady but burning with quiet fire. She had proved it beyond doubt. When the world doubted her, when command overlooked her, she carried within her the grit and precision that turned the tide of impossible missions. Skill had spoken louder than rank, louder than prejudice, louder than dismissal. And now, no one in this base or any other would ever mistake her for just another logistics pilot again.